In this Blender tutorial, I will show you how to create this procedural cracked ice material in Blender. So here is the procedural node setup, and after we create the node setup, I'm going to show you how to join the material together into this custom node group. So we have the scale to change the entire size of the material, and I actually think the material looks really cool when it is much smaller. That does look pretty cool. Then we also have the cracks color, so you can make it a different color if you want to. Then we also have the ice color, so you could make it more of just like a gray color. You could also make it brighter or darker. Then we also have the cracks thickness, so I can drag this down or drag it up to change the size of the cracks. Then we also have the cracks distortion, so if I turn this up, it's going to make the cracks much more distorted or less distorted. Then we also have the cracks detail, so I can turn this down, you can see now it's very smooth, or I can turn this up and you can see it's very, very detailed. Then we also have the cracks jagged, and I think this value is really cool, so if I turn this up, you can see now the cracks are kind of moving all around and it looks very jagged. Then we also have the material roughness, so you can make this more shiny or more rough. And then finally we have the cracks bump strength, and then also the ice bump strength. If you'd like to purchase this material and help support this channel, then you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And if you'd like to purchase all of my procedural materials, then you can check out my ultimate procedural material pack. And my ultimate material pack comes with all of my procedural materials pre-set up in Blender's asset browser, with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. And you can also check out my procedural material packs if you'd like to purchase packs of 10 materials. And to learn how to create any of my procedural materials, you can check out my procedural material tutorial playlist here on YouTube. So before we create the material, I'm going to show you what I have set up in the 3D viewport if you want to set it up the same way that I have. So I pressed Shift A, I went here to Mesh, and I added an icosphere, and I like adding an icosphere because it's nice and smooth and round, and it's a nice object to preview the material on. Now right behind me, if you click here on the Add Icosphere settings, I just turn the subdivisions up to 6 so that it is a nice smooth icosphere. And then you can use the Object Context menu and shade the object smooth. And then I also wanted a more interesting object to preview the material on. So if you press Shift A, you can go to Mesh. I'm going to add a monkey head, and I'm going to bring the monkey head over, and I'll bring it back a bit and kind of rotate it over. And then using the Object Context menu, I'm going to shade the object smooth. And then I want to give it more geometry, so I'm going to press Ctrl 2. That is the shortcut key to add the subdivision surface modifier. Now when modeling to the real life scale in Blender, the default primitive objects are a little bit higher than the average human, so these objects are a little bit large. So I'm just going to select both of these objects. I'm going to hit S to scale, and I'm going to scale them by 0.2 and then enter, just so that they are much smaller. And then after you've scaled this, just press Ctrl A and you can apply the scale, so this is now the object's new default size. And then I also added a camera here, and I pointed the camera at the object. And if you select the camera and then click here on the object data properties to go to the camera settings, I turned the focal length up to 90, and that way it just zooms the camera in and makes everything look a bit more flat. Now for the lighting, if you go over here to the world properties, I added in this Birchwood HDRI, and this is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, links in the description if you'd like to download it. And I downloaded the 1K HDR version. So just add a new world, and then you can click on the yellow dot here next to color, and you can choose environment texture, and then you can click on the open button and just open the downloaded HDRI. So this world will give us some nice lighting and reflections to light up the scene, but I do just want to add some more lights to really light up those scenes. So I added these two lights here. So these are both area lights. And so this first one over here is on this side, and on the area light settings, I turn the power to 1000 and I turn the color to a slight blue color. And then this one here, this is kind of like a rim light on the back. So this is again an area light, and the shape is set to rectangle, and I made it really long, and I turned the power to 200, and this also has a very slight blue color. Now also, if you want to make the background transparent so you can't see it in the background, you can open up the film tab, and then you can just check mark the transparent button, so that way the background isn't quite as distracting. And also, if you go down here to the color management, I'm using the view transform of Filmic, and I'm setting the look here to high contrast, and this is going to make the colors more saturated and contrasty. So I am in the shading workspace, so I have the 3D viewport right over here, and I'm in the rendered mode, and then I have the shader editor right over here. So I will click on new to add a new material, and I can just rename the material to Cracked Ice. And then what you can do is you can click right here, and you can drag and drop the material onto the other object, or just select the other object, and then from the drop down you can select the Cracked Ice material. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview the different nodes. So if you don't have the Node Wrangler enabled, you can click on Edit, and you can go to the Preferences, and then over there on the Add-ons tab, just search for Node Wrangler, and you can checkmark the Node Wrangler add-on, and I'll show you how to use it in the video. So let's start by creating the cracked texture. So I'm gonna press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm gonna search for a Voronoi texture. Let's drop the Voronoi here, and then with the Voronoi texture selected, I'm gonna press Control T, that is using the feature of the Node Wrangler, and it's gonna add the texture coordinate and mapping. And then also using the feature of the Node Wrangler, you can hold down the Control and Shift key and then select different nodes, and that is going to preview the node on the object. Now I want to use the object coordinates because the object coordinates will place the texture on the object more evenly. So let's take the object and I'm going to put that into the vector of the mapping. Now I can change the scale of the Voronoi texture and I can make this smaller, and you can see we have all these little dots, but we don't really have that cracked texture. So what I'm going to do is click on the F1 here, and I'm going to change this to distance to edge. And now we have this really cool cracked texture. And also right here on the 3D, I'm going to change this to 4D instead. And now that we have the 4D, we have this W value, and you can drag this around, and this is going to kind of randomize the cracks. And I actually forgot to put this into the custom node group in the introduction of this video, so I'll be adding this into the custom node group. So right here on the scale, I want to turn this to 10 because I think 10 is pretty good for the cracks. Now, if you look here on the edge of the cracks aren't very random, they're very straight. And so I want to distort the placement of the Voronoi texture so that it is very random. So to do that, I'll press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I can search for a noise texture, and let's put the noise texture between the mapping and the Voronoi. So because the noise texture is going through the vector, it's distorting the placement of the Voronoi texture. So now you can see it's very random. So let's now change some of the noise texture settings. So here on the scale, I want to turn this to like a 10, so it is bigger. Let's also turn the detail all the way to the max of 15, so it's very detailed. And here on the roughness, to make it even more detailed, I'm going to turn this up to a 0.6. And you could also turn up the distortion if you want to, but I'll just keep it how it is. Now this noise texture is distorting the cracks so much that you can't really even see the cracked texture. It just looks like a bunch of noise. And so I want to make the noise texture less strong. So I want the noise texture to have less of an effect over the distortion of the Voronoi. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix node. Let's drop the mix node up here, and here on the float, I don't want to use the number values, so I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to change it to color instead. And then I'm going to just drop the mix node here in between the noise and the Voronoi. Let me drag this over so I have a bit more space. So I want the noise texture color to actually be going into color B, and then this mapping node here, this vector, this is the mapping which isn't distorted at all, and so I want to put this into value A. So now the mix is mixing between not being distorted at all and being very distorted with the noise texture. So I can now drag the factor back and forth, and you can see if it's 0, it's not distorted at all, and then as I turn this up, it's more and more distorted. Now as I move this around, you can see the texture is moving around a lot. So to make it so it's not moving around so much, you can click on the mix here, and you can change it to the linear light instead. And I can now drag this, and you can see it's just distorting it, but it's not actually moving the texture. Now I want the factor to be very, very small because I still want to be able to see the cracks, but I just want the cracks to be a bit noisy. So I'm going to turn the factor value to a 0.024. So a 0.024, and now you can see it is pretty subtle, but it is definitely noisy. Now I want to make the cracks much smaller because they are quite thick right now. So right here on the Voronoi texture, I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's drop the color ramp right here after the Voronoi texture. And then I can drag these values together, and you can see as I drag it together, it's going to be more contrasty, and so it's going to make the cracks much smaller. So I'm going to drag the white tab way over here so that it is very small. Now later on when we create the customizable node group, I do want a value which is going to change the size of those cracks. And if the values are darker, if they're less saturated, you can see the cracks are bigger, but if I drag this over, they're going to be more sharp. A really easy way to create a custom value for this is to press Shift A, go to the search, and you can search for the hue saturation value node. And let's put this in between the Voronoi and the color ramp. And so the hue saturation value node has the value, and the value is going to change it from white to black. So if you turn the value down, it's going to make it darker, or if you turn the value up, it's going to make it lighter. And so that will change the size of the cracks. So we can use this in the Customizable Node group. Now I also want to mix in a noisy texture to give it more detail. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the Musgrave texture, and let's put the Musgrave texture here under the noise texture. And then I want to use the object coordinates, so here on the mapping, let's take the vector, and I can put that into the vector of the Musgrave texture. And also I want all the textures to be going into this mapping, and that way this mapping node can be used to change the size of the entire material with the scale values. Now to preview the Musgrave, let's hold down the Control and Shift key and then select it to preview it. So I now want to change some of the Musgrave texture settings. So I'm going to turn the scale to like 3, and then I also want it to be very detailed, so let's turn the detail all the way to the max of 15. And then right here on this dimension, I want to turn this all the way down to 0, and now that it's down to 0, you can see we have this really cool noisy texture. So I now want to put this noisy texture into the base color, which we have right here. So what I'm going to do is press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the mix node, because the mix node will allow us to mix 2 colors together. So let's drop the mix node up here, and let's click on the float, and I can change it to color instead, because we are mixing color values. So I now want to go back here to the Musgrave texture, and I want to take the height value, I want to drag this over, and I want to put it into the factor of the mix. Then I want to take this color ramp here, and I'm going to put it into value A. And then I can Control Shift and select the mix to preview it. So the factor is determining where it's going to be value A and where it's going to be value B, and so that is the black and white texture of the Musgrave. So now the color ramp here, this is the cracks and this is going into A, and so now B right here, this is going to be the color of the Musgrave. So I just want to make this fully black so that it is darker, and so now it is the same color as the cracks. So now I actually want to make the customizable colors. So I'm going to drag the material output back here, and then I want to click on this mix, and I want to press Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to drop it right here after the first mix. Now this mix result, this can go into the factor, so now we can change color A and B to be the cracks color and the ice color. So here on color A, I just want to make this fully white, and then here on color B, you can really make this any blue color that you want, but I've found that kind of a grayish, kind of dark blue and a not very saturated blue looks pretty good. And if you want to use the exact same color that I'm using here on color B, you can go to the hex value and you can punch in 586A76. That is the exact color that I'm using. Now if you take a look at the material, you can see most of it is actually that white color, and there's just some blue here and there, but I want more of the blue color. So I'm going to make this Musgrave texture more contrasty so that you can't see quite as much of it. So I'm going to click on this color ramp right here, and I'm going to press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's drop it right down here between the Musgrave and the mix. So just drop it right there. And then I can hit the backspace button with the color ramp selected, and that is going to reset the color ramp. So now to make the Musgrave less visible, I can click on the black tab and I can just drag it over, and I'm going to drag it over to about here. You could drag it over more if you want. I just want to drag it to about here. I think that is pretty good. So now you can see much more of the blue. You can really see the difference. Right back up here, this mix, this is our final base color. So I'm going to drag the principled shader over here, and then I want to take the mix result and I want to put that into the base color of the principled shader, and I can drag the material output here, and then I will Control Shift and select the principled shader to preview it. And there we go, it's starting to look like cracked ice. Now ice is very reflective and shiny, so I want to turn this roughness value way down. And I'm going to turn the roughness to a 0.073, just a 0.073, so it is very shiny. And now you can see it's reflecting the HDRI. Now obviously you can see through ice, and so I want to turn this transmission value up, and the transmission value is going to make it act like glass or water. Because now if I go inside this object, you can see it actually is transparent. If I go in here, you can actually kind of look around and you can see the light is passing through it. Now I don't want it to be transparent all over the place. I want it to be more transparent when you're looking straight at the material, but then over here on the side of the object, I want it to be a bit less transparent. So I'm going to press Shift A, I'm going to go to the search, and I'm going to search for the layer weight node. Let's just drop the layer weight here, and then I'm going to Control Shift and select it to preview it. So the layer weight node is going to make the edges of the material a bit lighter, but then it's going to make the center of the material darker. And you can see even if I move around my view, it's actually changing where it is light, because it's actually changing depending on the angle that we are looking at the faces. So if I go right over here, kind of look at this face here, you can see it is darker, but then if I navigate over here to the side, now because we are looking at this face on an angle, it is more white. So I want to take the Fresnel here, and I want to put the Fresnel into the transmission. So this way some parts will have more transmission and other parts will have less transmission. But if I Control Shift and select the principled shader, it is very hard to see, and that is because this layer weight is very gray. However, if I drag this blend value, you'll be able to see it better. So if I Control Shift and select the layer weight, if I turn the blend value up, it's going to be a bit lighter. So if I Control Shift and select the principled shader, now you can see if I turn the blend value up, it's going to be more transparent. Or if I turn it down, it'll be darker, and so it'll be less transparent. But I want to have even more control over this value. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for another color ramp, and let's put the color ramp here between the layer weight and the transmission. And then I can Control Shift and select the color ramp to preview it. So what I first want to do is make it more contrasty. So I'm going to drag this over here, and I actually want to flip the values. So I'm going to drag the black tab over here and the white tab over here. So now you can see it's very contrasty. So on the sphere, we basically have this dark circle, and then it is white in the middle. So I want to drag this white tab to about here, and then I'll drag the black tab over to about here. Now, if I Control Shift and select the principled shader, that is going to be way too contrasty, because you can see right in here, it's like super transparent, and then there's that kind of like that weird circle there, and then it's like not transparent over here. It's just very reflective. So to fix this, I can turn this black value up. So if I go to the color ramp, click on the black tab, I can click here on the color, and I can turn this up, and now it is going to be a bit more subtle. And if you want to use the exact same gray color that I'm using, you can click on the gray color and go to the hex, and you can punch in a hex value of B7, B7, B7. Now where the cracks are, I want that to have less transmission. So I want to take the cracks texture and I want to mix that here into this transmission value. So I'm just going to select this mix node right here, and I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, and let's drop it here in between the color ramp and the transmission. And so I'm going to use this mix to mix in the cracks. So this color ramp right here, I'm going to put it into value B. And then this color ramp right up here, if you Control Shift and select this color ramp, this is the cracks texture. So I'm going to take this color and I'm going to put it into the factor. And then I can Control Shift and select this mix to preview it. Now I want to be able to see the cracks a bit better. So here on A, on this color, I'm just going to make this a bit darker, and now the cracks are a little bit darker. And for color A, the hex value that I'll be using is going to be E6 times. So you can punch that into the hex value if you want to use the same color that I'm using. Now if you Control Shift and select the principled shader, you can take color A and you can make this darker, and if it's darker you can see the cracks better because they don't have any transmission, but if you turn it up to fully white, then you can see through the cracks. So that's why I want to just turn it down a little bit so you can see the cracks a little bit better. Alright, so we are almost done with this material, but this material is very smooth, and so I want to put some data into the normal to give it some bump. So I want the cracks to be a bit bumpy, so we can take this color up here on the cracks, I can take the color and I can put that into the normal. Now you can see there's some weird shading issues, and that's because we need to convert this color data into normal data that the shader can use. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for the bump node, and let's put the bump node here before it goes into the normal. And then I want the color of the color ramp to actually be going into the height value of the bump, and this way it'll convert it to normal data. So now you can see those cracks are bumpy. But that is a bit too strong, so I want to turn this down so it's less strong, and I actually want to turn it to a value of 0.25. So that way, if you zoom here into the cracks, you can see they're bumpy, but it is kind of subtle. And then I also want just some overall noise over the entire ice. So we have this noise texture right here, and we can use this noise texture and we can put it into the bump to add a bunch of noise. So to mix two bump maps together, you can click on the bump, you can press Shift D to duplicate it and drop it down here. Now the normal can go into the normal, so now we've mixed the two bump nodes together, and we now have this height value that we can add data into. So let's go here to the noise texture, and we want to take the factor value, let's drag this over, and I want to put it into the height of the bump. So now you can see the ice is very bumpy. but it is way too strong, so I want to make it much less strong. So I'm going to turn the strength to a 0.07, and that way now there is some bump over the surface, but it is quite subtle. And there we have it. So that is the procedural cracked ice. So let's now join this together into a custom node group. So what I'm going to do is click and drag just to box select all these nodes except the material output, and then I want to press Ctrl G. Ctrl G will join it together into a node group, and you can press the tab key with the node group selected to go in and out of the node group. And let's just drag this over here, and then I also want to drag it out so it's a bit bigger, and then if I click here on the name, Cracked Ice, I can press Ctrl C to copy that, and then I can click here on the node group and press Ctrl V just to paste that name. So now we have the Cracked Ice shader. So let's hit the tab key to go into the node group, and if you press the N key, that's going to open up the side panel here, and you can click over here on the groups tab, and here we have the inputs and the outputs. Now right here on the outputs, I like to rename this to shader because I like that better. So if I click on this, I can just rename it to shader. So now outside of the node group, you can see it says shader. So let's hit the tab key to go into the node group, and we can now add all the different values, all the custom values into this group input. So the first value that I want to add is the overall scale. So we have the mapping right here, and because all the textures are going into the mapping, this scale value is going to change the size of the entire material. So let's take the scale, and I can put that into the group input. Now right up here you can see it's the group input, so you can rename this if you want to, but I want to leave it at scale. But you can see that's a purple dot there, and so that is going to have all three values, but I just want to have one scale value. So right back here in the group input, if you click on the scale, I want to change the type here to float, and that way it's going to use one single value. Now also the default value, I just want to turn this to 1, and then you can see it's gotten rid of the texture. That's because I need to go out of the node group, and here on the scale, I just need to turn that to 1, and then I can go back into the node group. So let's now add the custom colors. So I'm going to drag the group input over here, and I'm going to drag it over way over to this mix, and I want to take value A, let's put that here into the group input, and also value B, put that in here. And then I can rename these. So I'm going to rename this to cracks color, and then also the ice color. Now I also want to control the thickness of the cracks, so I'm going to drag the group input over here to the hue saturation value, and this value is going to make it lighter or darker, and so it'll change the size of the cracks. So let's put the value into the extra socket here, and I can click on this to rename this, and I will rename it to cracks thickness. Now if I drag the group input back here to this linear light, this mix, this factor here is controlling the distortion of the cracks. So I want to put the factor into the extra socket here, and then I can rename this, and I will rename this to cracks distortion. Now let's drag the group input right down here under the mapping, and I want to put the roughness and distortion into the group input, because on the noise texture, if I turn up the roughness, that's going to make it more detailed, and also if I turn up the distortion, that's going to make it look more jagged. So let's take the noise texture roughness, put that in here, and also the noise texture distortion, I can put that in there. And then this first one here, I want to rename to cracks detail, and then the second one, I want to rename to cracks jagged. Now right here on the Voronoi texture, we also have the W value, and that's just going to randomize the cracks. So let's take the W value, and I can put this in here, and then I can rename this to cracks randomize. And then I also want to be able to control the roughness of the ice, so let's go over here to the principled shader. I just want to take the roughness, let's drag this way over, and I can stick this here into the group input. And then finally, to finish this off, I want to have the bump strengths. So if I go right here to the first bump, this is controlling the bumps of the cracks. So let's take the strength value, I can drag this over, stick it in here, and I can rename this to cracks bump strength. And then finally, let's do the last one here. So let's click on this bump, we can take the strength, I can drag this over, and let's put this here into the last one. And then this one is going to be ice bump strength. So I can now hit the tab key to go out of the node group, and the node is finished. And I'll press the N key to close that side panel. So we have the overall scale, then we also have just the cracked color, then we also have the ice color, so you can make this like a brighter blue if you wanted to, and then we also have the cracks thickness, you can make that bigger or smaller. We also have the cracks distortion, and we also have the cracks detail, and we also have the cool cracks jagged value to make the cracks really jagged and bumpy. Then we also have the cracks randomized, so you can just randomize that if you want to, and then we also have the roughness value to change the roughness of the ice, and then we have the cracks bump strength and the ice bump strength. So thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful and I hope you enjoyed it. And if you'd like to help support me and this YouTube channel and purchase the material, you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page with the links in the description. And if you'd like to purchase all of my materials, then definitely check out my Ultimate Blender Procedural Material Pack. And my Ultimate Procedural Material Pack has all of my materials pre-set up in Blender's asset browser with custom thumbnails, sorted catalogs, and customizable node groups. You can also check out my procedural material packs to purchase packs of 10 materials. And to learn how to create all of my materials, you can check out my procedural material playlist here on YouTube. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.